is anything that you need a microscope to see. Okay, so it's a living organism that you need a microscope to be able to see. Now, when you think about the size of things that you can see, okay, if you are just using your eye, you might be able to see some parasitic worms or something, of that size. Um, Whereas if you're really looking at the microbes, okay, the first thing, um, something very large might be a yeast cell, and something very small might be something called mycoplasma. Um, and those are all things that can be seen with a light microscope. And that's, where the majority of microbiology started. Now, because viruses need an electron microscope to be able to see, viruses are, uh, are a very recent discovery because there just weren't electron microscopes that long ago. Okay. Here's some more examples of things like some insects or a dog you'd be able to see with the unaided eye. But when you get into the light microscope range, then you're starting to be able to see things like red blood cells or different sizes of bacteria. And if you have a electron microscope, then you can actually see things like viruses and even some molecules. Okay. You'll notice that you can never see just a single atom of an element. Now, the microbial world is divided into a few very large categories. In terms of living organisms, we have these large domains called the bacteria, the archaea, and the eukarya. In terms of infectious agents which aren't living, we can have viruses, viroids, and prions. In that category, viruses are the major thing that we think of in terms of being non-living. And the reason viruses are not living is because they don't produce their own energy, and they have to take over a cell in order to do the functions that the virus wants. And we'll get back to that in a couple of days. Now, when you look at the domains of the living organisms, the bacteria and the archaea are both prokaryotic organisms. So it means without a kernel. Okay, and so that word means that you don't have a nucleus. Okay, and in the eukarya, those are your eukaryotes, and in the microbial sense, those would include algae, protozoans, and fungi. Okay. The microbial eukaryotes tend to be a little bit bigger, but are not, but are still microbial. So there are a few of the prokaryotic bacteria, which is one of the things that we'll spend the majority of the course on. In panel A, you see those rod-shaped bacteria. So those rod-shaped bacteria are longer than they are wide. Then you have cocci-shaped bacteria, or in other words, little balls. And then finally in panel C, we see a spirochete. And so, this is a vast majority of what the cells will look like under the microscope. here's an algae, and I put this in here just for a bit of comparison. The algae tend to be quite large compared to the bacteria. Here's some molds, and the the molds in panel B are a sporulating mold, and so each of those little balls there is a spore, which could go off and give you um, a new fungal colony somewhere. Those little balls are what a majority of people who are allergic to molds are actually allergic to. They can breathe those in and can have an allergic reaction to them. Okay, this is a paramecium, and the paramecium is a fairly large microbe on the microbe sense, and you can see that the paramecium has a number of hairs called cilia that are all over the cell that are helped to move the cell through liquids. Okay. Now, for viruses, now we again need an electron microscope. Okay, and so in panel A, you can see a filamentous virus called the tobacco mosaic virus. In the panel B, you see a bacteriophage, and so a bacteriophage is a virus that infects bacteria specifically. And in panel C, you see an influenza virus. Okay, and one of the things about influenza that makes it last so long in the environment is that nice coat that's around it, okay, around that nucleic acid. It actually keeps the nucleic acid from drying out, and so it can go on to infect you quite easily. Just to compare some things between a virus and a cell, your bacterial cells tend to be about 1,000 nanometers. Okay? A virus is 1/100th of that size in general, and you can see that animal cells and plant cells are quite a bit bigger than our other cells. Now, I think one of the things that's real interesting here is that the nucleic acid content, if you have the nucleic acid content of just a virus, it's either going to be DNA or it'll be RNA, but it is never both DNA and RNA at the same time. Cells have to have both DNA and RNA. So it's, just looking at the genetic content is generally one way of knowing whether you're looking at a virus or a bacteria. In terms of having internal components, viruses don't have any. Okay? Cells have a number, including ribosomes, and so since they have the ribosomes and they can generate their own energy, okay, the cells can be alive, whereas the viruses are said to not be alive because they don't have any ribosomes, they can't make their own protein, they have no enzymes for harvesting energy, and so they have to take over some cell type to be able to do the energy things. So again, just in a very broad sense, uh, to be a microbe, you can be a virus of some sort, a bacteria, a protozoan, or a fungi. And, you might say, well, look, there's that capped mushroom. How is that a microbe? Because, you can see that growing in in your yard. And the point is that that sporulating body is actually a group of the microbe. Okay, it's not just one microbe. So something like a yeast would be a single cell fungi, but a mushroom would be a whole collection of microscopic cells. Now, one of the things that we'll be discussing as we are dealing with microbes is we know the most about microbes from diseases they cause. Okay, so if you look at this graph, and this is deaths per 100,000, which is a very common way of describing death rates, you'll see that in 1900, infectious diseases like influenza, pneumonia, tuberculosis are some of the leading causes of death. Okay. Now, as we go forward to 2000, okay, and this is in this country, you'll see how small influenza and pneumonia has become. We also sort of have the new infectious disease of AIDS in 2000, but you'll also see that the heart disease, cancer, stroke, and pulmonary disease are now much bigger players in 2000, and a, a big reason for that is because people are no longer dying of the infectious diseases. Okay, so they actually live long enough to get cancer and heart disease. Cancer specifically is in general, a very old person event. Okay, it's yes, there are kids who get cancer, but it's not the predominant cause of death from cancer. It's generally in older people. Okay. So you can see, comparing these two, that the infectious diseases were prominent in 1900, but have pretty much disappeared by 2000 in terms of cause of death. Okay, here are some colonies of bacteria on a plate. Each of those is a colony, and in the colony there are a large, very, very large number of cells. Okay, generally about 1 times 10 to the 8th cells per colony. Here's some cells under the microscope. These are actually the same cells that were on the previous slide, and you can see the majority of them are bacillus-shaped cells. That is, they are longer than they are wide.